So I kind of sit there and go, I have no idea what you should be eating. I don't know what you're eating now.
This is On Nutrition, a podcast from Mayo Clinic where we dig into the latest nutrition trends and research to help you understand what's health and what's hype. I'm Tara Schmidt, a registered dietitian with Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. This episode, Nutritional Psychiatry. About a fourth of U.S. adults have some sort of diagnosed mental health disorder, like depression, anxiety, or ADHD. And with the everyday stress of life, even people who don't have a diagnosis may be looking for a way to find some relief. Can we find a solution on our plates? Is nutrition an effective way to treat mental health? I'm so excited to be joined by Dr. Brooke Resch, a psychiatrist in Madison, Wisconsin. She's an incredible nutrition influencer who goes by Cook with Dr. Brooke online. Dr. Resch's content focuses on convenience cooking, mindfulness, and translating nutrition information into real-life meals while dealing with real-life limitations. Hi, Dr. Resch. Thanks for being on Nutrition with me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm a fan, just so you know.
Well, that's so exciting. I'm just now reaching the point where I'm starting to meet fans. Before that, it was mostly just my mom watching my videos. So it's exciting.
That's awesome.
That it's reaching a wider audience. Yeah.
What you do is so important, and I'm excited to learn more about it specifically. But to start, there are all sorts of theories online about how to improve your mental health, especially with food. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to do some myth busting in a segment we like to call Health or Hype.
Sure, hit me.
All right, let's do it. Foods high in refined sugar can worsen symptoms of conditions like ADHD and depression. Is this health or hype?
It's mostly hype. So we know that on average, diets that are high in processed foods, high in refined sugars are going to be generally not very good for our brains or our bodies over the long run, higher rates of dementia. But minute to minute, it doesn't really seem to affect people. Like I have a piece of cake and I feel happy.
Yes.
But we haven't really seen that the piece of cake leads to a depressive episode necessarily. So in the long run, it's probably best to be minimizing these foods. But in the short run, it might help you get through a tough day here or there.
Yeah.
I think it can fit.
This is a marathon, not a sprint, right?
Right. And with ADHD specifically, there were theories for a while about sugar and especially hyperactive symptoms in ADHD.
Yes.
Really tough to tease the sugar part apart from everything else. So, kids get more sugar when they're on a road trip and maybe they're cooped up in the car all day, or you get a piece of cake at a birthday party where there's lots of kids and there's lots of balloons. So when we try to control for all of those other variables around sugar, we don't see it being that powerful. I've never had a parent say, my kid's so hyped up from apples, which apples have lots of sugar in them too. It's usually these foods that we try to restrict or avoid, and then that ends up leading to bigger behavior changes or bigger feelings, maybe because of the sugar, but probably more because of the kind of environment and the rules that we've placed around the sugar.
Salmon and other fatty fish are good for your brain. I hope this one is health because I talk about it a lot.
Probably health.
Okay,
so
good.
We do see that in observational studies, folks who get more fish in their diets tend to have lower rates of and lower severity of depression and anxiety. But we do have a harder time replicating that in those more experimental studies when we're randomly assigning people to one group or another. The link there is not as strong, but it is probably better for us than it is harmful for us to be trying to incorporate more seafood in our diets.
Agree. MSG is a big one that we get, especially with questions from parents. Is it an intolerance? Is it specific to one population? I want to learn more about this from you.
Well, I actually had not heard of this until recently. From what I could find, it seems like mostly hype. So MSG is a naturally occurring substance. Obviously, you can buy a bag of MSG at the grocery store, but you also find MSG in things like tomatoes, in things like mushrooms, not in those high potency amounts. So from what I could find, this research is really in its infancy and there's not great data. And I also think about a lot of foods that contain MSG having other value to them. So people associate it often with Chinese food or Asian food, but oftentimes those meals are very high in vegetables or they contain whole grains. Sometimes they include seafood, right? If it helps you achieve other health goals, I wouldn't necessarily be wary of it.
Yeah. It is possible to cure your mental illness with diet alone.
I would say that is also hype. And I'm the person, that preaches all the time about diet and mental health outcomes and how important it is. I think it's one tool in the toolbox.
Yeah.
And the way it has been studied thus far is in addition to standard treatment. So it's not really been studied as its own independent treatment factor. And the help that it does bring is probably a smaller margin of difference than those evidence-based treatments. And if we're talking about lifestyle interventions and depression management, you get more mileage out of exercise as far as we can tell. But diet can definitely help move the needle. But I wouldn't cancel your next psychiatry visit or your next therapy visit because you're going to start eating healthier.
It's an adjunct and it's not going to hurt, but we still need to recognize the importance of our other tools, as you said.
Right.
What other misconceptions, if any, are you often correcting?
Patients will sometimes ask me, well, what should I be eating? And in a 15-minute psychiatry appointment, we really don't have a lot of time to get into it, which is part of why I post the videos online. But also I kind of sit there and go, I have no idea what you should be eating. I don't know what you're eating now. I don't know where you're starting from. I don't know what foods you like. I don't know what your budget is. So these are all considerations. I think people want there to be one answer or one trick or a hack or an optimization thing that maybe they're just missing. And if the doctor tells them about it, then they'll be enlightened and be able to transform. When in reality, I'm just ask a small child what healthy foods look like. They'll give you a good picture. If I ask my 90-year-old grandma who grew up in a different time and a different food scene, it would look pretty similar as well. The core tenets of a healthy, balanced diet that's good for our brains and our bodies, that has not changed.
I completely agree. Now, nutritional psychology, Dr. Resch, isn't a field that we hear a lot about. So what is it?
Nutritional psychiatry, it's the overlap between food and mood, between nutrition and mental health outcomes. It is not a board-certified subspecialty. So it's a little bit hand-wavy about who can and who does call themselves a nutritional psychiatrist.
Okay.
There are different kind of programs and resources. And as somebody who did have some background in public health, my med school did have more nutrition content than many. So I feel comfortable talking about this online. But I guess I would say it's somewhat akin to a registered dietitian versus a nutritionist, right? That's not really a regulated term. And there might be people out there who call themselves nutritionists that are giving good, valuable, evidence-based information, but the label itself doesn't tell you a ton about their training.
Got it. For those of us who feel like we might be in a gray area, how do we know if we need to seek out a formal diagnosis?
I think a lot of people are convinced from the internet that they have ADHD, but they're convinced because they're describing things that are typical. And the difference is not whether or not you experience these symptoms that everybody does experience, but how pervasive are they in your life and how much do they impact your daily functioning? And the tricky thing with psychiatry is that everything is on a spectrum with normal. Depression is on the spectrum with normal. There's not actually a clear line between neurotypical and atypical. We sort of draw some in the sand for the purposes of standardizing diagnoses and standardizing treatments. But all these symptoms that people come in describing are symptoms that people experience in the real world too. So I want to definitely identify and treat people who need help without over-pathologizing, without making everything a diagnosis or a problem or something that we're going to change your diet and your meds up for necessarily. The phrasing that I use with my patients a lot is, it's not a problem unless it's a problem, right? Like feeling
disrupting
depressed,
your life. Yeah.
That's not a problem unless you're not living your best life. Even something like severe persistent mental illness, psychosis, schizophrenia, hearing and seeing things, scary. It's not a problem unless it's a problem. If you hear voices, but you have a full life and you don't like the side effects of medications and you're able to get to work on time.
Yeah.
We can negotiate that. We can problem solve and pro-con things. And so similarly with ADHD, if you suspect you might have it, whether or not you get diagnosed is going to vary widely based on who you go to, because some people are very stringent with the diagnosis. Some people are very generous with it. I think I tend to fall somewhere in the middle. But the mantra that I will probably repeat to you and that I think a thoughtful clinician will repeat to you is really the why. What would be different if you had this diagnosis or if you had treatment, and what would be better?
Let's dig more into the science of food in the brain. The two neurotransmitters we talk a lot about when it comes to mental health are serotonin and dopamine. Dr. Resch, how focused should we be on trying to boost those neurotransmitters with our diet?
I mean, it's not super common that people have gross deficiencies of all the foods that they need to be able to be making sufficient neurotransmitters in their brain. It's more about the receptors and regulating how those things are made in the brain. So it is important to be eating a balanced, diet, because if you were to become deficient in certain macronutrients, then production of those is going to be more challenging. But it's not to say that, if you're eating badly around the holidays, then your brain is just going to run out of dopamine. One, I guess, micronutrient that I remember a mentor of mine focusing on who ran an ADHD clinic was copper and zinc, that they're both important cofactors in dopamine synthesis, and they're often overlooked, but we don't need a ton of copper and zinc. They're trace minerals too.
Sure. We often hear about the gut-brain axis. So what's the role of the gut microbiome in mental health? And how does our gut inflammation impact the brain?
So we know that rates of mental illness are higher among folks with gastrointestinal conditions and vice versa. And so it is thought that disruptions in one can really closely impact disruptions in the other, and that health promotion in one can positively impact the other. So Dr. Mayo has kind of written about and spoken a lot about this. He's a gastroenterologist, actually. He's not a psychiatrist, but his career has been kind of focused on trying to understand that connection better. Exactly how it works is not completely ironed out yet. It probably has to do with some signaling from the microbiome in your gut. For people that are more curious about that topic specifically, I do often recommend his book, The Mind-Gut Connection, and the highlights from it be taking care of both. And he doesn't preach in there that you have to go on an elimination diet, in that we have to get rid of gluten or that you have to take a probiotic, but we're taking care of our gut through fiber, through naturally fermented foods, through a variety of different foods that our gut microbiome can nom on and enjoy, as opposed to the same thing over and over.
Yes.
That's really going to be the keys of taking care of gut health and the direction I point people.
So I heard you give a nod to fermented foods. Do you believe that empty calorie, ultra processed foods affect our gut microbiome and our brain?
I mean, they certainly would if that's going to be the bulk of your diet. Does an individual bag of Doritos affect it? Who's to say? That's certainly a difficult study to implement. If it's the crux of your diet, then you're missing all those other good things that we had talked about. I think all foods really can fit in a brain healthy diet. So I think there's room for a Twinkie or for a bag of Doritos, so long as we're not missing out on all the other good things.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that all foods fit. But we like to ask people how often and how much. And those are pretty key questions.
To be an annoying psychiatrist, I would still flip it back and go, well, where are we starting at? Are we eating processed foods every day? And can we try making and packing a lunch? Are we eating processed foods? Are we doing that 3 times a week? Our dinner is going to be a frozen pizza. Can we switch that to once a week, right?
A lot of scary talk around sugar and ultra-processed foods is a bit overblown, at least in the short term. True, they're linked to worse mental and physical health outcomes over time, but eating a slice of cake won't send you directly into a depressive spiral. Same with ADHD. People have blamed sugar for years, but when researchers actually control for things like environment, that effect pretty much disappears. It's not usually just the food, it's everything happening around it. There's some foods that seem to support mental health, like fatty fish. But even with that, the evidence isn't as rock solid as headlines make it sound. And ingredients like MSG are mostly misunderstood too. It naturally exists in a lot of foods, and there's no strong evidence it's harmful to most. The bigger myth, though, is the idea that you can fix or cure mental illness with diet alone. Nutrition can absolutely support your mental health, but it's not a replacement for therapy, medication, or other treatments. If anything, exercise seems to have a bigger impact than diet. While we're still learning about the gut-brain connection, a healthy gut seems to support better mental health, and vice versa. Eat fiber and fermented foods, and don't stress about being perfect. It's more about balance over time than getting every single choice right. Now, we'll talk about specific nutrients that could help with some conditions. Are there any specific foods or nutrients that have been shown to improve mental health? You talked a little bit about copper and zinc. Any others that we should be mindful of, or any others that we should be intentional about avoiding?
Yeah, I mean, seafood is pretty promising in that. I think oysters I don't like to use the word superfood, but oysters pack a huge punch of zinc, of omega-3s. The nutrition per calorie of oysters is like through the charts. They're very off-putting to many people. So I'll sometimes say, like, try getting the smoked oysters. They're going to have a smoky flavor as opposed to a seafood flavor. So that's kind of like the starter ramp for oysters, but that's a great place to start. Another colleague of mine that I would shout out is Dr. Drew Ramsey, who's a psychiatrist that wrote the book Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. And he talks about seafood, beans, nuts, and seeds, and a little dark chocolate. So those would be, if not areas to focus on, areas that most people struggle with. Fruit is also important. Whole grains are probably also important. Healthy fats like olive oil are also important. But most people can think of ways that they eat or enjoy fruit or whole grains or could add healthy fats. People have a harder time with those other foods that I just mentioned outside of dark chocolate.
Yeah.
If you like chocolate, you like it. Yeah.
So is this Mediterranean in style? Is there a specific eating pattern that is linked to improving certain diagnoses?
The most evidence we have is for the Mediterranean diet. So
Okay.
it's focusing on getting healthy fats, whole grains, seafood, fruits and veggies. And I also clarify as often as I can that the Mediterranean diet does not mean Mediterranean food. It's not about that specific cuisine.
Yes.
So while we call it the Mediterranean diet, in keeping with the studies and the research, and in keeping with the area of the globe that this research is being done, that's not to say that you can't have Tex-Mex in a Mediterranean way or that you can't have Japanese food in a Mediterranean way.
I completely agree. And this is a conversation I have a lot when people have the argument that the Mediterranean diet, quote unquote, is too expensive. And I'm like, well, let's talk about it, because I didn't ask you necessarily to get Alaskan salmon flown in to wherever you live in the middle of Texas, right? We talk about the nutrients, not necessarily those specific foods. And speaking of kind of those trade-offs, you obviously emphasize a lot of cooking and convenience on your platform. Tell me more about why it's important for patients with psychiatric diagnoses to be in the kitchen, but also allow themselves to have some convenience foods or cooking methods.
I think it's important because for folks that I work with that are trying to take care of their mental health, we do ask a lot of them. We ask them to come to appointments. If medications are part of their treatment, we're asking them to take that consistently. We're asking them to do a lot of work in therapy or sometimes homework outside of therapy. We're asking them to exercise and to get better sleep and minimize their alcohol and minimize the cannabis. And we're asking them to do a lot of things. And oh, by the way, you need to completely overhaul your diet. That would be overwhelming and upsetting. And so, yes, I want folks to be in the kitchen more and to be taking care of their physical and mental health through food. But I don't want to ask them in a way that's going to be like intimidating or overwhelming or feel like it's, no pun intended, but adding something else to their plate.
Now, we also see people with diagnoses like ADHD or depression or anxiety, I would say in two camps. I've absolutely had patients who undereat as a result, especially if they're on a stimulant. So either undereating as a symptom of their diagnosis or a side effect of their medication, or overeating or gaining weight, again, as a symptom or as a coping mechanism or as a side effect. So what are some of the reasons behind that?
So with depression specifically, in older versions of the DSM, it was described in a fairly narrow way about mood symptoms, usually less sleep, appetite reduction, talking slower, moving slower. There is these kind of prototypical symptoms of depression, which we still commonly see, but the diagnosis has expanded to say it's really sleep changes. So some people sleep less, some people sleep more. It's appetite changes. Some people are eating less, some people are eating more. And so I think that can be validating and valuable to people in and of itself to know that, well, I've gained or lost weight in the months leading up to this appointment because that is part of the condition that brought me in, and not, well, you're depressed and you forgot to eat, or you're depressed and you're overdoing the chips. Like, an appetite change is somewhat expected. In depression world, most of our antidepressants are actually weight neutral. But weight neutral doesn't mean that your weight doesn't change. It means that if we give 100 people this medication, 100 people's weight won't change, but there's some up and down with them. And so I think letting people know ahead of time about what to expect from their diagnosis and what to expect from their medications makes it a lot easier to say, I know why, I know what's going on, and gives people more agency.
So that's how you would approach a patient with depression. How would you approach the eating habits of someone with ADHD?
With ADHD, a lot of times it can be both a symptom of executive dysfunction, forgetting when to eat or where to eat, or maybe being hyper focused on something else. And so kind of distracted when it's time to eat. Stimulants do reduce appetite. With ADHD specifically, or any medication that's going to be suppressing an appetite, I give my patients what I hope is not harmful advice, but I say, we're doing the opposite of what you've always been told. We're not going to listen to our 100 cues. We're not going to wait for our brain and body to say it's time to eat, because it won't come. And so instead of listening to your body, which is a phrase people are familiar with and sounds very nice and intuitive, we're going to say, we have a granola bar and an apple at 8 a.m. because that's when it's time to have our granola bar and our apple. And we are going to have a timer on our phone for lunch at noon, whether or not we're ready for it. Because if we don't, our brain and our body won't tell us when we need those foods. And so I spend more time on that with my patients who are on stimulants. I probably could give a similar speech to people who are still struggling with their mood or struggling with other conditions that are affecting their appetite. But that's kind of an approach I take a lot, is don't blame yourself. Blame me. If it's a side effect of your medication, say that darn Dr. Brooke has taken away my appetite. And so therefore now breakfast is more of a chore and less of a joy than it once was. But if the alternative is significant weight loss or malnutrition, then I'm sorry, I gave you a new chore. And that is where we're at.
I am all for your advice. And I have found myself giving the same advice, not necessarily for mental health diagnoses, but maybe it was someone who underwent bariatric surgery. Or, as you know, I am in the world of GLP-1s. And just because your appetite has been suppressed, which has helped you ideally lose weight, which was healthful for you at the time, now you're not eating at all, and that's not okay. What about conditions like autism or OCD, where there can be symptoms of food aversions that make healthy eating a little bit more challenging? How do you advise patients to still meet their nutritional needs?
So I was actually lucky that the nutritional psychiatry certification that I did spend some time on these topics. And the main takeaway that I remember is, in those types of conditions, we are only talking about adding. We're not talking about restricting. So there's a lot of talk with autism about elimination diets, if there's food dyes or if it's gluten. But when you look at the average dietary intake of, say, a kid with autism, it's much more restrictive already than the average bear. So instead of saying those food dyes might be part of the problem and taking away maybe one of few foods that feels safe and comforting, is adding things in and doing so in a slow, tangible manner. So we're not overwhelming kids or adults with big changes right away, but maybe putting a new food next to the food that's familiar. Maybe having a condiment with a new food in it as opposed to a brand new food that we can kind of dip and control on our own. And similar with OCD. OCD is one where there's maybe some supplements that might be supportive. So maybe omega-3s or NAC, N-acetylcysteine, seems to be more evidence-based in certain anxiety conditions and possibly in OCD and certain tic disorders. So there may be some areas of more targeted approach, but mostly it's going to be a gentle approach, an encouraging approach. What can we add, not what should we get rid of?
My favorite kind of approach. I love it. We talked about medications, especially those that can suppress the appetite. How can we as the patient talk to our provider about changes in appetite, changes in weight as a symptom or a side effect? Is there verbiage, not necessarily scripting, of course, but questions that they can ask? I feel like this might be a little bit uncomfortable for people. I already got myself to go to an appointment that I was nervous about, and now I'm really nervous about a new medication. And I'm having some side effects or some symptoms that are related to food or weight, which is a sensitive topic. Is there a way that we can talk to you about this?
I guess if it just takes some of the fear and stigma away, know that your doctor has already talked about it with thousands of people, that it has come up before, that you're not the first person to experience changes in your eating habits as you start to engage with treatment. When this comes up with me, I often spend a lot of the time from there teasing out how much of this is a medication side effect and how much of this is actually a result of your mental health improving. Because like I said before, with depression as an example, you can see either appetite suppression or appetite increase in a depressive episode. So if we start a medication and then you come back and say, I've gained a few pounds or I've lost a few pounds, is that a side effect of the medication, or is that addressing an underlying symptom of your depression that maybe you had otherwise mentally or physically acclimated to before? You're used to eating more than you had intended, or you're used to not eating enough. And now that's changing. And I worry that's a consequence of the medication versus a return to my normal self. And if people have been ill for a long time, that can be hard to tease apart. And so it's always worth pro-conning. So bring it up boldly, bring it up gently, make your needs and your questions known. It's really best to write stuff down before you come to your appointments, because most people, myself included, we get there and we go, wait, what was I going to ask? And I tell my folks all the time, I'm sure you'll think of more questions as you're walking to your car. So if it's non-urgent, like write it down and save it for the next time that we're talking, because otherwise you're going to get in there and get overwhelmed. And your nice, well-intentioned doc that went to school forever and ever just to help people, they have important letters after their name, and that's intimidating. And don't be intimidated. They're there for you.
When it comes to specific foods that might help mental health, it's less about magic nutrients and more about patterns. Seafood, especially oysters, get a lot of love because they're packed with zinc and omega-3s. But if that's not your speed, remember this phrase: seafood, beans, nuts, seeds, and a little dark chocolate. Add in fruit, whole grains, and healthy fats like olive oil, and your bases are basically covered. You don't necessarily need to eat a specific diet for your mental health. It's more about hitting those food groups in whatever cuisine fits your life and your budget. And if you're struggling with appetite, don't blame yourself. It can swing a lot with conditions like depression or ADHD, and the meds used to treat them. So sometimes the goal is just eating consistently, even if that means setting reminders instead of listening to your body. And for people with food aversions, like in autism or OCD, gently try adding in new foods rather than restricting safe ones. Now, let's get into supplements and sustainable habits.
Now, we know that, especially in America and especially with our foods purposefully having nutrients added to them over time, vitamin D and B12 and iron, etc., we don't see a lot of nutritional deficiencies. And again, this is a good thing. So I guess my question to you is, are there nutritional deficiencies that you see that are linked to mental health? Is there a time that anyone ever needs to get their blood work or a lab drawn for a deficiency in your world?
I mean, when I meet new patients, unless it's very clear cut that this is for sure a depressive episode and nothing else is going on, right? Oh, it started after I lost my job and I haven't been able to pull out of it. Or this has happened 3 times before, always in the winter, and there's some like predictable thing there. If you've never been to any other doctor or seen anybody else and you have these new symptoms of feeling depressed or anxious and fatigued and you're not sleeping, so somebody said come with a psychiatrist. If this is your first time interacting with healthcare, I'm probably getting lab work. And what that lab work is probably going to include, at least where I practice here in the upper Midwest, most of us get vitamin D deficient almost universally. And we know that vitamin D deficiencies rarely in and of themselves are going to cause a depressive episode, but they certainly make them worse. So that's one that is very common and is very treatable. So vitamin D is one that I want to make sure we're not missing. Iron deficiency is another one, especially if people have more restrictive eating habits, if they're not eating meat for ethical reasons or for environmental concerns or for sensory reasons. There's also iron, of course, in other food sources, but if we're having a vegetarian or a vegan diet, we're going to be missing out on some iron, on B12. Sometimes I will add on a copper or zinc. Those are, they're even less common. So it would really be if I have a big suspicion for it, let's say everything else is normal. If ADHD symptoms were just to have started more like recently, as opposed to symptoms from childhood.
We're going to talk about which specific supplements may be helpful. But first, I want to ask, do you think we should be getting, for example, our omega-3s from food first before we turn to a supplement?
I think food first for all of these. Another Cook with Dr. Brooke mantra is supplements should be supplemental. So they should be supplementing a healthy, balanced diet.
Correct.
And if there's reasons why we're missing parts of our diet, maybe a fish allergy or ethical objections to meat, or you live in Minnesota and it's dark outside, so you can't eat enough dietary vitamin D to make up for the lack of sunlight. If there's something specific going on, let's supplement that specific thing. But there's not a gold star. Everyone should just be on this one all the time. I think they should generally be more targeted.
Can I throw a few supplements your way and you can kind of rate in whatever way you like if they are beneficial or not?
Sure.
So the B vitamins.
May be beneficial in large part if you are eating an omnivorous diet. You're probably getting enough B vitamins in your diet and peeing a fair amount of any extras out. Relatively cheap, relatively benign as far as like it's tough to overdo it with them. Like you'll kind of pee it out. But so we're rating on a scale of 1 to 10 or giving like a letter grade.
Whatever you want. Yeah.
I would say B minus.
Oh, I like that. Okay. Magnesium.
Magnesium is a B plus. It has some more evidence in insomnia and in anxiety. What people don't like to talk about is that it's maybe helpful because it's kind of chemically similar to lithium, which is a great old psych drug that we use all the time.
Yeah.
But nobody really wants to go on lithium. So it does seem to have some calming effects. We do use high doses of magnesium in certain seizure conditions, like enough magnesium will stop a seizure. So it is helpful at the overused phrase, regulating the nervous system. People listening can't see the air quotes that I'm using, but it does have a genuine calming effect. It does have some potential side effects. There can be some gastrointestinal distress if you're overdoing it with the magnesium. So I would say B plus.
Okay. Zinc.
Zinc is a C. I mean, most people are not going to be zinc deficient. I'd much rather you eat some oysters. And it is a little spendier to get an actual test for and to get a supplement for than some of the other ones. So unless you know that you're deficient, probably a waste of money.
Agree. St. John's wort.
I don't know. So some people prefer St. John's wort because it's naturally occurring and then kind of refined. The main thing I know about St. John's wort is it has a lot of drug-drug interactions. So if you're taking any other medications, you want to be looking up if that's a medication affected by St. John's wort. And I've never seen a study showing it having particular psychiatric benefits. So it's not one I've recommended. I'll say D.
I trust you. Ashwagandha.
Ashwagandha is, I guess, if we're sticking with letters, kind of to be determined. It might be part of the future of psychiatry, but I don't think there's enough evidence really there yet.
Melatonin.
Melatonin is an A in my book. It's a hormone naturally occurring in our brains. So our brains are all pumping out melatonin every day. And my big soapbox for melatonin is the way that it's marketed is very different than how it's studied. Because when we study melatonin, we're giving people a relatively low dose of it about 12 hours after rising to sort of enhance that natural spike of melatonin. So if you get up at 6 a.m., that's 6 p.m. That's not when you're going to bed. And that's because melatonin at those doses is not a sedative. It shouldn't make you feel tired at 6 p.m. It's a hormone that is cueing your brain and your body that you're going to go to bed in a few hours. And so if you have been taking it and saying, gosh, I didn't feel tired at all, I still couldn't fall asleep, that's because that's not really when your brain is making melatonin. That's just when the bottle says to take it. So it's not a great treatment for like primary insomnia, but it is an excellent treatment for circadian rhythm disorders. And it is pretty cheap. It's cheaper than most people realize because I'm usually telling my folks to cut it in half. Since they sell it at the store, 5-10 milligrams, that's very different than taking 1 milligram 4 hours before bedtime. So melatonin A, especially if you're a shift worker or you're changing time zones or you're trying to resync that circadian clock.
Okay, I love that. Do you have any success stories from your work in clinic or even any followers?
I mean, I saw a comment the other day that was really heartening to me. And it was somebody who had put vegetables on their pizza for the first time ever, like as an adult. And they were like, it was the best pizza I ever had. And, you know, if you're somebody like my household that has pizza once a week, we just added a whole serving of vegetables to your week. Are there other things we could be doing better if you're only eating one serving of vegetables a week? Of course. But for somebody to have a new vehicle for getting vegetables in a way that they enjoy, that's affordable, that's familiar, that's an excellent start. Inertia is hugely powerful. So whatever objects at rest tend to stay at rest, objects in motion tend to stay in motion. Adding vegetables to your pizza might lead to another 1,000 steps tomorrow. And that might lead to drinking more water. And that might lead to putting vegetables on my tacos next time, right? Like it's getting that inertia going.
Where can people find all of your awesome videos and advice with Cook with Dr. Brooke. I feel like I can't call you Brooke, but Cook with Dr. Brooke Resch.
It's always better if it can rhyme. So it is at Cook with Dr. Brooke, Dr. Doctor, not the full DOCTOR. Cook with Dr. Brooke, and I'm on pretty much most major social medias. So I have videos out on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube. I'm also technically on Facebook and Substack, but pretty new there and growing. So if you want to be one of my first dozen followers on Facebook or
You
Substack,
got it.
I'm over there too. Yeah.
I love that. Dr. Resch, thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom. I just really appreciate your kind and realistic approach. So thank you.
It's been wonderful talking.
True nutrient deficiencies aren't super common in the US, but they can still matter for mental health in certain cases. While vitamin D and iron deficiencies don't cause mental health issues on their own, they can definitely make symptoms like depression or fatigue worse. That's why doctors will sometimes run labs, especially if symptoms are new or unclear. When it comes to supplements, the big rule is food first. Supplements are just meant to fill specific gaps, not solve everything. Some, like magnesium or melatonin, may help with anxiety or sleep, while others, like B vitamins, are probably unnecessary for most people. And zinc and herbal supplements tend to be more hit or miss, unless you actually need them. You don't need to throw money at every trending supplement. Instead, focus on small, manageable steps. Even something as simple as adding veggies to your pizza can build momentum toward better overall habits. That's all for this episode, but if you have a follow-up question, leave us a voicemail at 507-538-6272, and we'll answer it in a future episode. For more On Nutrition episodes and resources, check us out online at mayoclinic.org/onnutrition. And if you found this show helpful, please subscribe and make sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. It really helps others find our show. Thanks for listening. And until next time, eat well and be well.